Welcome to the IGEOS show, where we help grow the passion for an extraordinary workplace. If you're listening to or watching this, we hope to strengthen your passion for a workplace that has the potential not only to have an extraordinary impact on your life, but also on the world. My name is Amit Riker, and my co-hosts are Valerio Pascotto and Timothy Galway. Now to you, Valerio.
Thank you, Amit. What drives our efforts is really a vision and credo to enrich humaneness in the workplace. For that, we interview thought leaders who have been inspired by values of compassion, empathy, and modeling to share their discoveries, challenges, and successes. Really, there is no time like now to change the tide, from hateful divisiveness to seeking similarities, from the myth of the genius to the wisdom of humankind, and from the fears of the primitive brain to the wonder of generosity and warmth.
To support you in this work of creating extraordinary workplaces, we would like to offer you a free worksheet you can download on the 5 disciplines of a high-performance team. Just go to IGEOS.net to download the sheet and learn more about us. And now, on to our guest for today. Welcome, conscious leaders, conscious teams. This is the IGEOS show, and my name is Amit Riker, and with me I also have my co-host, Valerio Pascotto. We've got a very exciting 2 guests today, the co-authors of the 2nd edition of the B Corp Handbook, Dr. Tiffany Jana and Ryan Honeyman. I'm super excited to have this conversation with the both of them. So I'll give a little bit of a bio introduction for both of them in case you don't know them, and then we're going to have an awesome conversation today. So Dr. Tiffany Jana is the CEO of TMI Portfolio, a network of socially responsible, interconnected companies that cultivate organizational inclusion worldwide. TMI was the world's first diversity and equity-focused certified benefit corporation. Dr. Jana has been featured in numerous publications, media, including Fast Company, Huffington Post. And they've also co-authored several books, including Overcoming Bias, Building Authentic Relationships Across Differences, and Erasing Institutional Bias, How to Create Systemic Change for Organizational Inclusion. Dr. Jana is an acclaimed international speaker, speaking for TEDx and South by Southwest, and many other amazing stages. And there's so much more that I could keep glorifying about her, but want to be able to get into the conversation. So Ryan Honeyman is a partner and worker owner of Lyft Economy, at Lyft Economy. He's helped over 30 companies, including Ben & Jerry's, Allbirds, Patagonia, and helped them become certified B corporations and also maximize the value of their B Corp certification. Along with Lyft Economy, Ryan's helped co-found the Force for Good Fund, a $1 million fund that invests in women and people of color owned Best for the World B Corps. And he's also a co-host of Next Economy Now, a podcast highlighting leaders who are taking a regenerative, bi-regional, democratic, transparent, and whole systems approach to using business for good. He's written many articles for Stanford Social Innovation Review, Fast Company, and also been a speaker on many stages such as SOCAP, B Corp Champions Retreat, and many more. So that's quite a mouthful. Really, really excited to have the both of you. So Dr. Jana and Ryan, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
So there's so much that we can talk about today. And getting into the book, I have the 1st edition of the book right there as well. Would love to just hear a quick overview maybe of how the 2 of you met and sort of how your journey overlapped to the formation of this amazing 2nd edition of the B Corp Handbook.
You want to take that one, Tiffany?
Well, sure. Yeah, so Ryan invited me to be one of the case studies featured in the first edition of the B Corp Handbook, which was such a huge honor. What was that, 2014 maybe?
Yep.
And yeah, really appreciated being part of that. I was only 2 years into my certification at that point. And then as a result of being part of the movement, we were able to meet at the Champions Retreat and got to know each other a little bit. And before you knew it, he reached out to me and said, hey, global diversity, equity, and inclusion expert who happens to run a B Corp. How about rewriting this second edition with me, including the perspective of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I wasn't sure at that point the extent to which the DEI was going to be woven throughout, but when he said woven throughout, he really meant it. So it was a great collaboration and a great time.
Yes, I agree.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Ryan, how about you? What was the journey like for you to create this with Dr. Jana?
Yeah, well, Dr. Jana, I've been a big fan. They've been on my podcast twice for Next Economy Now. And yeah, I think that, as Dr. Jana said, there was this idea that diversity, equity, inclusion for many folks who are not maybe as like deep into the space, it's sort of like, yeah, you have your environment, and then you have your your community giving, and then you have your diversity, and it's sort of like a piece of like maybe this larger puzzle of like business for good. And it really was apparent to me from some life events, like having a daughter, and just like, the election of our current president, and just like a lot of stuff was like, there's some real serious issues that we need to talk about. And diversity, equity, inclusion can't just be like a case study or a chapter in the book. It's got to be everything. It's got to touch every aspect of the book. And so that was, and as a, white male, cisgender, middle class, like I didn't have there was no standing. I had to really authentically write about a lot of these issues. And so Dr. Jana was the first person who came to mind as like a global expert on these issues, also in the B Corp community. And so it just made sense. It was like, got on the phone, and Dr. Jana was like, hell yeah, let's do this. Let's write this book. So.
That's amazing. It's very apparent. And I was just mentioning to Dr. Jana before we started recording, like the introduction alone, I feel like could be a whole book of both of your stories and your backgrounds. And it's such a rich introduction. And I can't wait to talk more about it and a lot of your experiences. But I'll hand off, Valerio, if there's something that you wanted to dive in and ask as we continue and dive into this conversation here.
I was very inspired. I have to acknowledge that in reading the book, and just seeing, particularly Dr. Jana, how you approach these topics in a kind and gentle way. And that, I think, is my main thought is when we are thinking of inclusion, it is easy for me to just include my tribe, and particularly if the other tribes have thoughts and diversity of thinking that is counter to my aspiration, my goals, and my vision. And I was touched by how delicate you were in approaching those that could easily be scolded instead of attempting to include them. And that was really my question. As you're thinking about diversity of thought, how do we bridge those whose thinking we are actually a little bit turned off by?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. And I have to say that I feel very uniquely positioned, by the universe or God, whatever it is that we believe that animates us, to create that bridge, because I sit at the intersection of so many different marginalized identities. It's very difficult for me to not experience myself in another. So the whole world is my tribe. I have no, desire or need to shame anyone. But when we're talking to people who differ from us in some fundamental ways and whose ideas really turn us off, there has never been a situation that I have been able to experience or even heard about where a common ground could not be found. We often just do not have the patience or take the time to identify that common ground. And even when we find it, we don't stay there. We focus on the discord. We focus on, whatever the disparity is in what we believe. So I would always invite people to be patient, listen, and look for the common ground and begin the conversation from that place. And one of the things that we've done in our contemporary society is we've, all but lost the ability to engage in civil discourse. It's okay to disagree. It's okay. Like, my friends exist across all kinds of spectrum. We don't all believe the same things, come from the same backgrounds, and that's actually a good thing. So being able to sit comfortably with the discomfort is an important aspect of community and relationship, and being able to find that middle ground, that common ground, is the only foundation that we can continue to build love and trust on.
Thank you. Very inspiring. And in a way, it's a wonderful way of using similarity bias. If I look for what we have in common, I take advantage instead of being handicapped by it.
Yes, amen. You got it.
And Ryan, I was very touched by the idea of going to even beyond the edge of giving up privilege and living by example. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more. You started already saying that you're white, male, cisgender. A little bit more about your experience of consciously looking at ways where that privilege would not be a handicap, so to speak.
Yeah, I think for me, I started to realize, with the help of Dr. Jana and others, that there can be a seduction in, like, for example, I'm white, and then to say it's the racist people in the South, in the Southern United States, that are creating the problems. It's them. And in learning more about this work, some of the things that really struck me are the belief systems and values that are unconscious and sort of they're unconscious and unintentional that lead to negative outcomes. So, for example, things like urgency, like this desire in our culture to be urgent, like doing things fast. Like, I never understood that is actually part of a culture of whiteness and white supremacy that can also lead to negative outcomes. So things like urgency, things like either or thinking, like it's either this or it's that, there's no gray area. Things like valuing success and as financial or as like material or like degrees. Like, my family's like, oh, where did you go to undergrad? And like, if you went to Stanford like 40 years ago, like somehow you're a smarter, better person. And so I think there's learning that there's life experience is like incredibly valuable. So for me, it wasn't just understanding that I'm white and cisgender and heterosexual and those pieces, but understanding like the sort of belief systems that also are part of our culture that are unexamined and that lead to, it's like this book had a great title. I think it's Racism Without Racists. Like, none of us, we're not racist. No one's racist, but somehow there's racism. So that clearly there's something we're missing. And I think it was tapping into that I find the most juicy talking to other white folks about, is because it's something that we're not aware of and that we sort of don't understand very well.
Interesting, because urgency appears to be one of the critical factors of bias. Bias comes in very quickly when I have a sense of urgency.
Yes, quick decision making.
Yeah. Amit, back to you.
Certainly. On this topic of urgency and maybe getting to hear a little bit more of your personal stories, both Dr. Jana and Ryan. Dr. Jana, you talk about, you mentioned in the book, DEI is not just a vocation for me, it's a deeply personal calling. And you talk about this level of urgency about DEI. I mean, it's even in the back, right on the back of the book, that The second edition has been expanded and updated to include a much stronger focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that these changes are important because it can no longer be a side conversation. So could you tell our audience, our listeners, our viewers a little bit more about what is this very strong personal calling and your own personal sort of sense of urgency to really contribute and make an impact with this field and this work?
Yeah, so I come to this work by way of a family legacy. So my mother is a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner. So I came up as a little brown girl with a mompreneur who had a PhD and was making it happen. So the idea that this was even an option for a career was planted very early, although I didn't find out until my 20s that I was going to pursue that path. So it was, just a way of existing and being that was natural and easy for me. But, it started, at the beginning, I was born in El Paso, Texas, on the border of Mexico. And my friends and babysitters and nannies were Spanish-speaking people. And one of my dimensions of diversity is that English is my second language, not through any claim or heritage that is Latinx or Hispanic. I just picked it up first. But what that does is it creates a sense of connection for me across borders. And as a military brat, we moved to Germany, and I was given access to German schools and the German language. So at a very young age, when you're thinking and dreaming in foreign languages and experiences that otherwise would be alien or foreign, it changes the way that you experience that difference and similarity and connection. So my tribe has been one that has been very vast and inclusive for a long time. And I guess, by the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I had a very strong sense of human similarity, of the fact that we come in different colors and shades and sizes, and we eat different foods and, smell different smells and see different sights. But ultimately, we are so much human. And the idea and the very thought of the things that we do in name of these differences and elevating them to status that makes no sense, that breaks my heart. I don't logically, I don't spiritually understand it. I logically understand where people are coming from, because they don't know, they don't understand, they're blind, they don't see. But it hurts my spirit. So I have spent as long as I can remember now building bridges across differences, because I've been fluent across so many identities and never quite fitting squarely into any one. So I'm so excited that the millennials gave me gender non-binary, because now I get to honor that too. It's just amazing to be in this place in the middle, just reaching out and asking people to see each other and shining that light.
That's beautiful, and there's so much rich part of your story behind that too. That we'll see if we dig into a little bit more. But Ryan, I would love to hear, because you and I had a chance to talk about it briefly, and you mentioned it just even at the beginning here, that you had your kids, and there was this very deep personal sort of transformation, particularly when you thought about the experience that your daughter is to grow up in. So could you tell us a little bit more about that really visceral story that showed up for you, and how it maybe influenced a lot of the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, I think for many folks listening, something changes when you have kids. And for me, it was a bit of a shift from intellectually supporting something like women's rights to being like, whoa, like this is really affecting my daughter. And like, there's part of a little bit of embarrassment that like it took having a daughter, or, some of these events like makes a shift, but it sort of did. And so I guess it is what it is. And so this is 2014, and it was similarly like Black Lives Matter was coming on. There was more cell phone videos of police shooting unarmed Black men. There was the Dakota Access Pipeline in 2016. Trump was elected, and suddenly it was like, what the hell is going on? Like this, and like I'd always considered myself someone informed and aware of issues, of global issues and issues related to diversity and inclusion. It's just that it became it became impossible to ignore for me. And I think for many people, like I've joked with some people, the benefit of Trump is that he ripped off the veil of the sort of many white progressives who felt like, yeah, we have Obama now, and like we're feeling like the world's in a great place, and like, isn't it, aren't we amazing? It's like, hey, problem. People of color have known this for forever. It's just mostly my folks. And so, and it's interesting, I'd love that Dr. Jana has this great story about like when we first met, I don't know if you're comfortable telling that, like your personal transition from like that, when we first met to like where you ended up today, like how that shifted for you.
Yeah, no, that was, it was profound. I mean, I think my gender pronouns and gender identity was as it had always been through the course of my life. So I really identified with that during this transition, and somewhere in all of the research and preparation that Ryan did getting to the point of writing the second book, he really kind of lifted up the idea of the delusion of white supremacy, which is, I like to call it the delusion of white supremacy because words have power and I refuse to give that term power. So it is a delusion. But when he first raised it, I had a response. I don't know how typical it is. I can only speak to the response that I had, but he was really on fire about the construct and the effects that it has had historically and continues to have on lives every day. And frankly, it scared me a little bit, and it became a kind of a touch point that woke me up a little bit, right? So as we talk about people being woke, and people of all races and genders and identities can be woke and wake up. And there is a continual like opening and flowering that happens when you do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. You have to keep digging and keep looking and keep being open to new things. But I was very nervous about articulating anything about that construct or going anywhere near it because it's a dangerous thing for Black people. And I, read some of the books that he recommended and some books that my daughter recommended. And I just reached this crescendo, at which point I realized, oh my gosh, this is not only an important conversation, it might be one of the most important conversations of this era, because we've got minority studies and gender studies and African American studies, but we're not really lifting up or studying or naming the construct of the delusion of white supremacy that is in the air that we breathe. Virtually everything is affected by it and shaped by it, and we don't even really acknowledge it. So it was really, really profound going on that journey with Ryan, and I have to thank you again, co-author, for raising me up to a new level, frankly, level of accountability in this season of urgency where societies and communities are polarized in really, really frightening and unproductive ways. We need to be able to have the hardest of conversations. And for me, this is one of the hardest conversations. So I'm trying to model what I teach people to do and lean into the discomfort in service of humanity.
And just for listeners too, I think it's important that when we say white supremacy, the delusion of white supremacy, it's not Nazis or the KKK. That is, I guess, one part of it, but white supremacy more as the institution and the systems that, because when you say racism, it means like, oh, like I could be an Asian person who's racist against a Black person, and like we shouldn't have that racism, which is, it's like getting part of the way there. But white supremacy is very clear about like who creates the system, who benefits from the system, what needs to happen to dismantle the system. And so it's actually like being very specific about the problem and not using sort of terms that are more comfortable often for white folks, but who don't actually get at the sort of the wizard behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz.
And it's taking away so we've got to pull the illusion of these pictures and archetypes that we've created for what does a leader look like? What does the word professionalism mean? You shouldn't show up that way to work because it doesn't appear professional. A lot of these things are proxies for showing up like a white male. right? So part of the reason that I wear my hair in this utterly ridiculously wonderful snow cone afro is because, one, I can't be fired by anybody, right? I enjoy it. I'm having hella fun up here with my crazy blue hair, but I'm trying. I just had a meeting today at a federal agency, and showing up in a federal agency like this, I'm showing people, like, let's talk about the reaction that you're having to me right now, because I am still Dr. Jana. I've still been able to deliver the results that I promised, and absolutely nothing about my capability and my qualifications and my competency and expertise is adversely affected by what's happening on my head. So you need to deal with that over there, and understand that people show up in different ways, and we're putting way too much emphasis on the spaceship. It's about the energy, the spirit, the human, the intellect, and our capacity to show up and do what we came here to do.
One thought that I was having is, of course, I grew up a teenager in the 60s, so I had fairly long hair, probably all the way to the bottom of my back. And my sense of exclusion is very petty in many areas. However, when I experience a loss, when I experience a threat, it's easier to get in touch with the absurdity of that delusion. I guess that my question is, what could usher, and you mentioned discussion, conversations, but what could usher a greater sensitivity towards this without having to wait for the drama, without having to wait for the sudden experience that shows how much loss there can be? And I was hoping that you could give us some wisdom there.
I don't know if I can give you wisdom, but I can give you my opinion.
That qualifies.
Perfect. Then I would say it's a combination of listening, education, and proximity. So the listening is about really paying attention to what people are saying, the perspectives that people are bringing, and in doing that, education and proximity are two things that can get you to that place of listening. Proximity is important because, like, in the United States, for instance, we are more segregated now than we were in the height of legalized segregation. And that's not just in the South, that is across the United States. And what that segregation has done is it's allowed us to exist in these bubbles whereby we can move freely about our lives in a very normalized way without really coming into meaningful contact with people who are substantially different from us. And that includes our children going to schools where they're educated around people who are mostly like them or socioeconomically positioned like them. There's multiple dimensions of where that homogeneity might show up. It's not just about race, it's about all of these dimensions. So we need proximity. We need to find ways to be closer to people. And then when we're closer to people, we need to listen and educate ourselves. Part of the education is reading, is going out and intentionally curating thoughtful literature, films, music that come from cultures and come from perspectives outside of our own. Oftentimes when we select our films, our music, the television shows we watch, the heroes oftentimes will reflect our own experience, and we keep repeating that over and over. So we've got to normalize the experience of the other, make room, make space, real estate in the mind and heart for the other experience. And proximity, I think, is, if I had to pick one over the other, I'd start with proximity because those are the lived human beings. But yeah, there's quite a lot we can do.
Well, that's a good, really excellent map, listening, proximity, and reading. Thank you for that.
That Dr. Jana, that makes me think of in your book, Overcoming Bias, you talk about this concept of contact theory, and contact theory is the idea that people can reduce personal bias through cross-cultural experiences. And I loved it because I believe I was listening to Ryan, your interview of Dr. Jana on Next Economy, where that's such a tangible, concrete and simple next step of, I think you gave the example of, like, watch a movie that you're usually not used to watching, read a book, go to an event, and it's a very concrete way to get that exposure immediately, and I love that. Anything more, Ryan or Dr. Jana, you'd like to say about that?
Well, I mean, one thing that's alive for me is I'm actually moving in 2 days from San Mateo in the south of San Francisco to Marin, which is, many of you know, Marin is like, I think, one of the whitest places in California. So it's one of the reasons my apartment's a little bare. And it's been really interesting to, Marin County is actually the #1 most racially disparate county in California. The wealth is that disparate. And so there's a lot of guilt and fear associated with moving to an area where it's actually placing my kids in like an even more whiter environment. Like we're talking about proximity. This is like, let's go to Marin and like stash them away. And so, however, like I think the proximity takes intention too. Like it just, because we like happen to live there doesn't mean like, okay, it's like, therefore I can't make the proximity happen. So I think like for me, it's been reading, listening, like consciously making choices to like put myself in uncomfortable situations with people and cultures that I'm not necessarily exposed to. And same with my kids, even if they don't get it in the like general neighborhood, it's like, let's go and meet folks and like have conversations. And so I think that I would just say for maybe listeners who are like, well, no one's in my like general neighborhood, it does take intention, and it's if you make it a priority, you'll find ways to build that trust and cross-culturally.
That's beautiful. I love just even the actions that we can take just within our vicinity. That actually reminds me of my wife, where she had a choice to go to 2 different high schools, and she specifically chose to go to the one that was more diverse because she wanted more of that diverse experience. And that's one of the things that really drew me to her about the values of a very worldly experience. And so I love that. I'd love to dig in a little bit more about some of the really digging into the DEI aspects. And as you brought up, Ryan, this whole concept of white supremacy, like the 2 of you are not shying away from like very jarring, edgy topics here, especially for maybe somebody who's like, oh yeah, I'm a good person, I want to do good in the world, I care about the environment, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like, this is edgy stuff. And so could you tell us a little bit more about like what does the edginess look like talking about white supremacy, and what does it mean to dismantle that, or the delusion of white supremacy? Dr. Jana, what is this aspect of equity in addition to diversity and inclusion? So wherever you'd like to play and chew on that, would love to hear. Dr. Jana is pointing to you, Ryan, so we'll go there.
Pointing to me on the DEI piece. No. Well, I mean, I think the at least the white supremacy piece, for me, again, it was like there was a few articles that were written by anti-racist activists that were saying we need to call it white supremacy because of, again, it's like it shows who's benefiting from it, how the system was set up, and also like what we need to do to actually make real change. Because I think when you think like, yeah, we need to like just have more diversity, like as if just having more people of color like in the space is gonna like somehow, I mean, it's better, right? But I think what white supremacy says is be like, no, like we need people of color in the space, but this is the target that needs to be looked at. And I think for me, it was talking to white folks and seeing their like response of like, like, oh my God, which is usually a good indicator I found of like, yeah, this is something we probably need to talk about if it's like so scary that we're not even willing to talk about it. And, you know, a lot of white folks were pushing back, like, well, we don't want to call it white supremacy because it's like, there's already the KKK and Nazis, and like that's just bad branding. Like, we don't want to be associated with that. We should call it, you know, racial equity, or we should call it even like white dominance instead of white supremacy. But I think that one thing I've learned is, like, it's not really white people's, it's not really our prerogative. It's not really our ability to like define the conversation anymore. It's like, we need other people to lead this, and we can be allies to support it. And so I think that I've just been attracted to it because for me, and you know, for Tiffany and some of the other folks that I've worked with, other Black folks and people of color, it's like, yeah, like, this is what it is. Like, we need to just call it out. And so it's been sort of, defining it has been powerful. And then the clarity of like what to potentially do about it in terms of both like understanding the values that contribute to it, understanding the institutional ways that it plays out. It just all seems to lend itself to like why Tiffany and I thought it was important to talk about it in the book.
Yeah, and I would say that the focus for me when I think about diversity, equity, inclusion, you know, the delusion of white supremacy, the focus I think should be on intentionality, like being intentional. All of the results that we're currently experiencing, all of the conditions that we're experiencing in the world and in the United States were optimized to create these results. It was all by design. It was very intentional. Right. So all of the, you know, from Jim Crow and Reconstruction to mass incarceration, you name it, we've created this set of circumstances, and we're living out, you know, the legacy of that. The dismantling of the delusion of white supremacy and the restoration or creation of equity and equitable opportunities across the world for all people will have to be equally intentional. There is no waiting for some default condition to restore itself. There is no, you know, oh, all the old racists will die off and the children will take care of it. Like that doesn't work that way, precisely because we've embedded structural racism and structural bias so deeply into all of our symptoms into all of our systems that they will continue to replicate themselves over time. So when we think, I love the idea of equity, the conversational focus on equity, because, you know, if diversity is just how we show up, all the different identities, demographics, inclusion is how we invite people to be in community, to join the work, to join the economy. Equity is, does everyone have this same opportunity to be successful within a given system, within a given construct? Can I show up in any organization with my blue hair and my gender non-conforming pronouns and feel like I belong and be invited to join the work, and through my competency be elevated through the ranks into leadership? Will I have as much of an opportunity as any, you know, equally qualified white man who does the same, or woman, or whatever? So I love that our focus on data, the conversations we've had around big data for the past many years, are giving us the opportunity to quantify, you know, for the first time, really meaningfully quantify experience, identity, and the trajectory of the employee life cycle, economic opportunity, et cetera. And that focus on data, I think, is fantastic because it does allow us to gain a little bit more access and insight into the experiences that people are having. And we see that they're disparate. Now we need to be intentional about course correcting.
Oh my gosh, there's so much good stuff there. Where to go from there? And just a quick note for those that are watching or listening, Valeria had to hop off, but we didn't want to disrupt the flow of the conversation just because there's such good, juicy stuff we're digging into. So maybe in the last 5-10 minutes that we have together, you know, Dr. Jana, what you were talking about made me think of, you mentioned in your book Erasing Institutional Bias, a couple of things that I heard regarding, you know, institutional bias can be erased if each of us owns our individual responsibility to be part of the solution. And that made me think of sort of the analogous to a lot of the work that we do with IGEOS and some of our workshops is really highlighting, creating these simulations of how our own interferences get in the way of us really working together as a team. So this individual versus team mindset. And I love that there's this sort of parallel of what you're talking about is like the team is where the global team, where the human team of like the interferences of you walk into a federal meeting and I see you with your blue hair, and then I'm having my judgments get in the way of what amazing stuff you bring to the table. And I can speak to that because I used to work for federal government as well, in the world of contracts. And so maybe what I'd love to hear now is, there's work that you're doing now, and in the conclusion of the book as well, you talk about like where B Corps are going, where the movement is still lacking. And so considering all these different themes, what's like a core component that you're really, just driven to make an impact of, in terms of where we still have to go? Would love to hear both for you, Dr. Jana and Ryan, what's that like driving force for you that you're just really moving on? And Dr. Jana, you're both pointing to each other, so you're both gonna have to share. So would love to hear.
I mean, yeah, so I am definitely driven towards this, people of color economic empowerment component of it all. So when I joined the B Corp movement in particular, full disclosure, I looked at the B Champions retreat that had happened the year before I joined, and I said, ooh, I'm gonna join that group because everybody's gonna know me when I'm done. Because I would have been literally the only chocolate drop in a sea of whiteness, right? And I'm a marketing person, on the inside. One of my degrees was in marketing, and I said, I will be visible. People will know what I'm doing just because I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb. So the B Corp and the social enterprise sector needs to do a better job of not only advertising and positioning itself in service of greater inclusion and also economic empowerment than it's currently doing. And I know I'm very, very pleased to see that there are a good number of efforts that are striving towards that end. And so that is, sort of on the B Corp front, but it is a joining in the community, because I personally, I feel like, people of color entrepreneurship is like our best chance to a personal reparations package. Laws in this country were written to favor the business owner, and my businesses are my personal reparations package. So there's a lot of empowerment that can happen there, but we are still businesses using our businesses as forces for good. There's so much opportunity to create inclusion and empowerment within our organizations and how we do our hiring within our constituencies and our customer bases. Every conceivable aspect of business could be reaching broader audiences and doing a better job of healing communities and bringing us together, but not enough of us are being intentional about that. So that is kind of what's got me on fire. And I don't know whether Amit, that I've started a tech company, and I'm in the process of doing all the things that you have to do with your tech startup, and things like raising capital with all of the intersectional identities that I represent. I have a less than 1%, a fraction of 1% chance of ever being successful in raising funding for my company because of these identities. So after I finish doing what I'm going to do and I scale my tech company and I exit my tech company, I'm already starting to invest in minority and women-owned businesses. I don't want to say minority, people of the global majority, people of color, right? And people of color-owned businesses, and I want to make a bigger impact in that space as well, because that economic empowerment and economic inclusion is what I'm on fire about.
That's incredible. Just for folks who might know what that tech company is, do you want to quickly mention that?
Sure. Yeah, it's Loom Technologies. It's one of the TMI portfolio companies, and we are measuring, mapping, and improving organizational culture using the power of artificial intelligence. Our product is currently in beta. We're about to hit MVP, but we are in the market. We are post-revenue, and we are making a difference using metrics and actually quantifying diversity ROI, which no one in the industry is doing except for this person.
Ooh, I love it. Oh, that's so good. I just want to put a quick plug. Folks who are listening and watching this, go listen to the interview that Ryan did with Dr. Jana, because she talks a little bit more about this. And I love just, Dr. Jana, how this is so in parallel with the way that you approach it. Like listening to interviews, the way you talk about this, there's such a sense of non-judgment as you're talking about this. and you talk about like data, like, hey, if you don't believe this, like, let me show you the data, and then you can believe for yourself. And there's a great little segment of that Ryan, you get to talk with Dr. Jana about that. So gonna make that plug for folks to go listen to that interview as well. Ryan, how about you? What's got you driving with the next steps, the future? Where do folks want to hear what you're up to?
Yeah, I just wanted to, Tiffany, where can folks, what's the website they can learn more about Loom? Just wanted, before we lose that thread.
TMI Portfolio Inc.com has a blurb on it. Its own website's not all the way up because it's still beta, but if you go to TMI Portfolio Inc. and you look at the technology or the data section, there'll be some information in there. And we've got a press kit that's downloadable on that site and on TMIconsultinginc.com site as well. Thank you, Ryan.
I'm sure Ahmed was going to do it at the end, but
absolutely.
Folks can't hear it too many times, I feel like.
And we'll be sure to include the links and whatnot to that site and the projects that you're working on. So glad you mentioned it, Ryan.
Yeah. So for me, very similar to Dr. Jana. We've actually been having this conversation around. There's another book that you probably have read, Amit, around Winners Take All by Anand Giridharadas. And so, for listeners who haven't read that book, it's basically saying, like, are we really creating the change? Are companies who are saying they're doing good, he talks about B Corp specifically. He also talks about like tech, like Facebook, and Goldman Sachs is now for good. Are we really making a difference, or are we just reinforcing structural oppression and white supremacy? He doesn't actually talk about white supremacy, but I'd be curious to have his thoughts on what he thought about that. But yeah, within the B Corp community, Tiffany and I have had these conversations around, like, do we feel like B Corps are actually fundamentally changing the economy, or are we somewhat deluding ourselves a little bit to say, like, yeah, we give back and we're B Corps and we're business for good, and like, aren't we amazing? But it's things like I'm maybe a for-profit university that's maybe incrementally higher impact than non B Corp for-profit universities, or like, I'm a high growth soy milk company, and like, I'm just not sure that we need another like VC backed soy milk company to like change the world, or we don't necessarily need a new B Corp private university. So I think that there's some real questions. I've been interested in, like, let's not pretend that we've got it all figured out. Like, sure, B Corps are making some meaningful differences in the world in terms of measurement and improvement, but at the same time, to like just assume that our community is therefore like making this huge, gigantic positive impact, and like it can sometimes lead to a lack of humility and reflection on like what's actually happening. And I think Dr. Jana pointed to it. It's the B Corp community is still a white sea with a few drops of chocolate, and brown and black folks are still not heavily represented. And I think that part of our blind spot in the community as a collective is sort of, like, instead of saying, how can we get more people of color to join the B Corp community? I think a better question is, how do we dismantle the existing ways that we're excluding people of color that we're not aware of, and that are part of systems that we're sort of unaware of. So I think that it's been a really interesting conversation around, like, what are our blind spots and what are we doing already that is exclusionary, and trying to change that, rather than just being like, let's go to this historically black college and try to recruit more B Corps or something. Like, we should do that, but it's not like that's going to be the answer.
Yeah, I have a very strong opinion about the absence of cooperative economics within the sector. Like, the B Corp sector by itself could do a much better job of supporting even the Black and brown owned businesses within the sector. Like, I have been a B Corp since, or my oldest company has been a B Corp since 2012. I just landed my first B Corp client this past year. So this is 2019. So 2018, my first B Corp client. And that was a huge disappointment to me. I even got on the stage for the first Be Inspired talk, the first series of Be Inspired talks, and offered free services, and nobody took me up on it. So to me, we got to hold ourselves accountable to a higher standard and search our own motivations and determine whether or not we are really trying to be part of this particular solution and leveraging our businesses in this way. Because the short answer is we really aren't making much of an effort. And when the many African-American people who I have tried, and Latinx people who I have tried to recruit into the B Corp community, pretty consistently people are like, why should I undergo all of this unnecessary scrutiny? And there's like, what am I actually going to get out of it? And I can't actually say, oh, the B Corp community is going to rise up around you, and basically anybody who uses the kind of services that you're offering is going to support you, and they'll find creative ways to help you be economically empowered. Because they won't. It would be a lie, and that's a travesty.
I love how in the journey of sharing this message and continuing to sort of promote and help expand the community, and this really comes out through the book as well, and the message you've been sharing is we can't get complacent. There's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of challenging within our own communities that we have to highlight and say, hey, we've got a lot of work to do, and we can't just sort of sit on the sidelines and say, hey, I'm part of this community, it's great. There's really a continuing to push the envelope, push the standards, because that is really what's going to help continue to shift the needle and move what we're looking to accomplish forward. So thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you so much, Tiffany, for this conversation today. And I wish we could talk for 3 more hours, because there's so much great stuff here, and I sure hope we get a chance to do that in person. But as we're wrapping up for today, where can folks listening or watching learn more about you? Either your website, your social, where can they go to keep following all the awesome, great work that you're doing?
So TMIconsultinginc.com has the most information on it in my universe. Certainly, if you Google Tiffany Jana, you'll find out more than you ever wanted to know. And I am Tiffany Jana on all social media.
Yes, that's why she's a great co-author too. Marketing she's a genius. Okay, so my social is at Honeyman Consult on Twitter, Lift Economy, LIFT economy.com. And then folks can find the B Corp Handbook and all of Dr. Jana's books on Amazon. Actually, don't go to Amazon. You should go to like Eric Kohler Publishers. It's our book publisher. You can go to Powell's Books. You can go to IndieBound and get it through your local bookstore. But if you are, I have to admit Amazon is evil and yet very convenient. And so if you have to get it on Amazon, it's there too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. Ryan Honeyman, Dr. Tiffany Jana. It's been such a pleasure. Conscious leaders, conscious teams, thanks for joining us today, whether you're watching or listening to this. We'll continue to have amazing thought leaders, industry leaders who are helping to create an extraordinary impact, not only in the workplace, but in the world. And until next time, have an amazing day, and we'll be talking again soon. Cheers. Thank you for joining us today. We have many more exciting thought leaders to come on this show. If you enjoyed this interview, please click the like button and also subscribe so that you can stay tuned to learn from other powerful thought leaders in future shows. We would also appreciate your comments and feedback on the show, as well as who else you would like to hear from. And don't forget to visit our site, IGEOS.net, to download the free worksheet on the 5 disciplines of a high-performance team. See you next time.